Hey guys, Pete here. It's going to be my recap and review for the rewatch of Season 1, Twin Peaks. We're going to look at Episode 2, which is the third episode of the season. The episode is also known as Zen, or The Skill to Catch a Killer, and it first aired on television on April 19th, 1990. Series co-creators, David Lynch and Mark Frost, this is the third episode in a row that they both wrote together. And this one is the second one that David Lynch directed and probably one of the most famous episodes of the entire series based on the Red Room sequence in Cooper's Dream at the end. The Log Lady intro that they added to this in 93 is sometimes ideas, like men, jump up and say, hello. They introduce themselves, these ideas, with words. Are they words? These ideas speak so strangely. All that we see in this world is based on someone's ideas. Some ideas are destructive, some are constructive. Some ideas can arrive in the form of a dream. I can say it again, some ideas arrive in the form of a dream. So the episode opens up in a different way. We see that the Horne family's eating dinner at the table, and we see the credits sort of continue to roll over that as they eat in silence. Jerry Horne makes his first big appearance. He's been in the show before, but this was his first big scene, I would say. And we get this really strange food fascination scene. I don't know what else to call it. I mean, there's sort of a lot of that in this series if you think about it. I mean, you've got Cooper's love of coffee, cherry pie. You've got this scene right here, and the way these two eat these brie sandwiches is pretty enthusiastic, at least, I would say. But after they have their baguettes with brie and butter, Ben and Jerry go outside of the room, and he tells them about what happened with the Norwegians, and Jerry mentions that he's depressed. Ben mentions that he can fix that they have a new girl at One-Eyed Jack's. They hop in a boat and they go there to Canada, the border, and we get introduced to both One-Eyed Jacks and Blackie, the madam who runs the place. It's a pretty racy scene, I would think, given the context of the time it first aired. The lingerie is pretty exciting, and sort of the hallway, the way that it's set up. I mean, it's just kind of like pretty over the top for regular network TV at that time, I would think. Other than that, not much happens. We see that Ben's just kind of creepy and that Jerry is a sidekickish sort of character, and get a little bit of intrigue with Blackie, but we don't get a whole lot going on there at that time. We go over and pick up with Donna and James over at the Hayward house. They're finishing dinner, then they have some time alone, and I've mentioned it in previous videos, this is the part that kind of is the least exciting or interesting to me, and they go through the same thing again. They feel like they're betraying Laura, and not much else happens. We see that they're falling in love, but they have these conflicted feelings. See Agent Cooper go back to his room. He blows a duck call, which is inexplicable. I don't know how that fits into anything else. He gets a phone call from Deputy Hawk, who explains to him that Ronette is still in the coma, and he found out that she worked at the perfume counter at Ben Horne's store. So when you go back and watch this now, all these things sort of fit into place a little bit. On first watch, you don't really get a whole lot of the connection here. But one of the things I realized about this is that it is pretty, what would the word be? The timeline is pretty consistent early on. But either way, Hawk tells him that he saw a one-armed man, which will turn out to be interesting later. And as he's getting off the phone, he hears someone knock at the door. But when he goes, there's no one there, but there's a note that says Jack with one eye. We see Bobby and Mike go to pick up some drugs, and we see that Leo's waiting there to scare them. We already knew that they didn't have the money because of what happened with the safety deposit box, so this just establishes that they have a serious situation going on. They need to figure out a way to pay him back. I always like the big flashlight scenes, I don't know what the technical term for that kind of flashlight is, but I always like the way those looked. So that was pretty cool when they're walking up. But again, not much here other than Leo is a bad dude and these two kids are in over their head, basically. There's also a hint that Leo is upset with Shelley, which we knew, and Bobby, I think, pretty much craps his pants because this guy who has a shotgun knows that he's cheating with his wife, but at this point, there doesn't seem to be any indication of that. It's just he knows she's doing something wrong, and we saw him give her that soap bar and the sock treatment in the last episode. We get our first really great Nadine scene, I think, here. I really like the way that this character is portrayed. I mean, it's one of those things, like the character, if you described it to me, sounds silly, but I just think that Wendy Roby does such a good job of being Nadine Hurley. Like, she's just a good actress, and Ed is also obviously really great. And we get this funny scene where he comes in. We don't know why. He's covered in grease, but he's trying to be very careful, and he ends up stepping on her curtain rods, and we see her flip out, break the rowing machine, this whole, meltdown kind of thing going on. There's a quick shot of Bobby going to Shelley at her house, and it's kind of out of place when you think about it, but basically the bottom line of that part is that he sees that Leo gave her the bruises, and he's really upset about it. But I guess, we find out that it's not just a fling. He does really care for her, in that exchange. So it's a little bit of confusion when you think about it because Laura's supposed to be Bobby's girlfriend, but we find out that his true feelings are definitely with Shelley. Then we get one of my favorite setup kind of scenes, and we get an insight into Agent Cooper and his technique. The old bottle on the log thing that comes from the dream. It's funny to watch them setting it up. Nobody knows what he's doing or why he's doing it. And you just kind of think about, we know these characters, so it's been established to us how it is. But just imagine a small town police department, and they have this fancy FBI guy coming in, and they're sitting there with a table full of donuts, and he's telling them to set up this bottle at a certain place with it's just I really enjoy this scene for some reason. He does talk about his dream 3 years prior about the plight of the Tibetan people and how he came out of it with this subconsciously gained knowledge of a deductive technique involving mind-body coordination working hand in hand with the deepest levels of intuition, to quote. So everything that we thought we knew about Cooper so far is just being amplified through this scene. But it is interesting thinking about it, watching it now after season 3 and the final dossier, the fact that this episode ends with his dream and just how much all of what Cooper did had to do with dreams in a way, you know what I mean? But they basically, what happens is they're going to go through the J's because of that note in Laura's diary about nervous about seeing Jay. He throws rocks at a bottle. As Sheriff Truman tells us all the different J people's connection to Laura, he hits the bottle for Dr. Jacoby, but it doesn't break. It falls off. And then when he does it again for Leo, he actually does break the bottle, which puts Leo on top of the suspect list. The next scene is the iconic Audrey's dance scene, and it's definitely a classic. We get the feeling here from the Haywards that Audrey's an odd girl, and that they really don't know what to make of her. When Donna comes over, that's just furthered in the way that she behaves. She talks about Agent Cooper loving coffee and the whole 9 yards, and just sort of goes on about that. And then there's a strange moment whenever Audrey asks Donna if Laura ever talked about her father. But before they really get into it, then Audrey gets up and dances, and that was sort of the scene that defines the Audrey character, I think. Another great introduction happens right after that when Albert Rosenfield enters the Twin Peaks Sheriff's Department, and we get an idea of what his character's all about. Albert's a giant jerk, of course, when he comes in. Truman puts up with it, but he gives him a stern warning. We get a bunch of other stuff that happens pretty quickly. Ed makes his way out of the doghouse because that grease that he dropped actually was the key to Nadine's invention, so she's really excited. We get an idea about Catherine and Pete's marriage and how that goes, and we see that he passes a key to Josie, who goes and finds that there's 2 ledgers instead of 1 in the safe, which is proof that Catherine's up to something. She's cooking the books so that one looks like they have a healthy profit, the other one looks like they're bankrupt. Then we get our first really haunting Leland scene where he starts playing a record. He starts dancing with the picture. We see Sarah come in. She freaks out. They struggle over it. The picture breaks. He kind of cuts his hand and he's like, it's a pathetic display. We see that he's a very troubled character here. And that we see Sarah scream, what's going on in this house? And in retrospect, that kind of gives you an idea that maybe there is something going on in that house. And then we get to the big finale, the big important part of this episode, in an episode that a lot of stuff happened, really, when you think. But this may be the most important part of the entire series, and that is Agent Cooper's dream. Starts out with him going to bed, and then we see him in a room where he's made up to look like he's older. And the first really haunting lodge image is the little man from another place as he's turned around backwards and he's sort of shaking. And we can see that something very strange is happening here in this area. There's a couple quick flashes. We see Sarah Palmer run down the stairs. We see the guy that we find out is named Bob. And we get a shot of the murder scene. Then the one-armed man comes back into the picture and he introduces himself to Coop, and it doesn't necessarily make sense when you first hear it, and maybe never. But he says, through the darkness of future past, the magician longs to see. One chance out between two worlds, fire walk with me. He explains his name's Mike and that he used to kick it with Bob above what we would call a convenience store. They killed together. Mike, the one-armed man, says that he saw the face of God and he stopped the killing by taking off his own arm. Then we see Bob and he says that he'd catch you with his death bag. Then he goes on to say, you may think I've gone insane, but I promise I will kill again. Back in the Red Room, Cooper is sitting across from the two chairs, and in one now sits Laura Palmer. The dwarf is in the other, and he says, let's rock. And you already know this, but I'm going to say it anyways, just because obviously when they talk, they're saying the words backwards. It's recorded and then reversed so that it has this really strange thing, and it's captioned, which is very bizarre the first time you see it. I mean, it's bizarre all the time, but it's especially bizarre the first time you see it because you really don't know what's happening. He tells Cooper that he's got good news, that Gumnulike's coming back in style. He mentions that Laura's his cousin and that she's filled with secrets. Coop asks directly to her if she is Laura, and she responds, I feel like I know her, but sometimes my arms bend back. The man from another place goes on to say, where we're from, the birds sing a pretty song, and there's always music in the air. And this is where that jazz music sort of kicks in. He gets up, he starts to dance. Laura comes over, gives Cooper a kiss, and then whispers something in his ear. Coop wakes up with some serious bed hair. He calls Sheriff Truman, tells him to come to the hotel to meet him for breakfast because he knows who killed Laura Palmer. Then he says, yes, it can wait till morning. So even though a lot of stuff happens in this episode, really this is what it all boils down to, is this short dream sequence. What's always been fascinating to me whenever I started to learn more about the series, though, is that we know that a lot of this footage is recycled from the alternate ending of the pilot. And it really just kind of makes you wonder, how much of this did they actually have? Like, how much of the Black Lodge, the waiting room, all of this stuff was actually really thought about ahead of time? I mean, these became cornerstone parts of the story, but if you think about what the log lady says in the beginning about ideas jumping out, and the fact that the legend is that David Lynch says he came up with the whole Red Room sequence by touching the hood of a car when the engine was still on, and the entire thing came to him in a flash. It just makes you wonder if there was really any strong sense that these would be some of the mysteries that would be enduring. I mean, obviously it's supposed to be mysterious, but based on everything that we've seen after the fact and the way that this all developed, it's just kind of crazy to think about it in that way. So yeah, it comes from a longer sequence, and basically the way that the international pilot is what it's referred to now is called, because they made this as like a standalone movie for the European market, and it really, there was no way to do it, you know what I mean? So they just sort of came up with this idea that Mrs. Palmer, Sarah Palmer, saw Bob but forgot, and then they find him in the basement of the hospital, and then just added all the Red Room stuff. At least that's the way I understand it. And I mean, that's the way when you watch it, it's just there. You know what I mean? It doesn't really explain much. So an interesting fact about it is, though, for a long time, you couldn't see the real pilot, the one that we watch now, or the one that aired on the VHS release. So the way that it ended was like totally contradictory to the rest of the series. We do see Invitation to Love for the first time. Shelley is watching at her house when Bobby shows up. That is a recurring theme throughout the first season. Another thing that is reported is that whenever Ray Wise, Leland, is rubbing the blood, that's his real blood. He accidentally cut his hand, and he sort of improvised that part of the scene. And like I mentioned, the big thing here is the first introduction of the Arm, the man from another place. I wish I could honestly say that I remember how I reacted to this when I first watched it. I remember thinking that it was weird. I don't remember trying to solve a mystery about it, because I remember a little bit, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, a friend of mine was watching it for the first time, and they were like, "That dream, it was a dream, though," you know. And I think probably that was probably the same way that I thought about it too, was that it was just a creepy dream that he had, and that there may be something important in there, but we would find out naturally as things went on. It didn't dawn on me, I don't think, at the time, that this would be something that we would talk about for decades to come. So it's a great episode. Like I said, I really like the emergence of the FBI and the contradiction between the FBI and the small town sheriff's department. Pretty sure this is when I decided that Ben Horne was just creepy and I didn't enjoy his character. I mean, I enjoy watching him, but he's just not a good person. Audrey obviously set up her place as being a very captivating character throughout. And James and Donna just started to get on my nerves. And I think a little bit with Mike and Bobby too, because of... They're not bad characters. It's just they're playing high school jocks who sell drugs, and you know what I mean? Like, they're not likable. But I do think that on the rewatch, I realized a little bit more about how that whole exchange with Shelley and Bobby, how there was something real there in how he wanted to protect her from Leo. So that's all I'm going to say about this right now. We'll definitely talk more about the Red Room and all of that as this goes on. It's one of my favorite episodes still, although I think that the first three really together is the genesis. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that this stands out. Obviously, the pilot's good in a different way. The second episode sets a lot of things up, and then this one takes us in a different direction. So it would be really hard to say that one of these would stand out as essential. I mean, as a trio, they're really all pretty essential as far as I'm concerned. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thanks to my Patreon patrons for making this happen. Sorry this took a little bit longer, but I'll be continuing on with the rest of the season. Think about joining us over there. I've been really obsessed with the final dossier and just thinking about that, and I want to make some more videos about that as well. But this is what you guys voted on, and this is what I will. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you turn on notifications after you do that. Follow me on Twitter and my other social media accounts. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you soon.